Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's free community webinar, PTSD, Challenges and Opportunities in 2023. My name is Tracy Duncan, and on behalf of the team at Fearless, thank you so much for joining us. While everyone is logging in and getting settled, and before I hand over to our host and chairman, Chris Barrie, just some general housekeeping and announcements. As always in our webinars, we welcome any questions you may have. Please comment in the Q&A section, and we hope to have some time at the end of the session to answer these. We will also be recording this webinar, and a link will be sent to all registered attendees in the coming days. So if you're unable to attend this event live or need to duck off early, you're still able to view the recording at your own convenience. Fearless is a charity run by volunteers. We're always grateful to receive donations, no matter how small, to continue the work we do. Our vision is to restore control to people living with post-traumatic stress. Donations can be made via our website, www.fearless.org.au. Please also stay connected with Fearless socially on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We provide updates on any upcoming webinars and events on these pages, so be sure to follow us. Okay, I think I'm ready to get started now. So good morning, Chris. I'll now hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Tracy. And welcome everybody to the first webinar for Fearless in 2023. It's my great pleasure to be able to introduce to you today the work of the Thompson Neuroscience Institute, which is attached to the University of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. This institute opened its doors in 2018 and has been doing stellar work since that time, which I know you're going to hear about during this webinar. I'd also like to welcome to this webinar all the First Australian representatives, both potentially some people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, people living with post-traumatic stress disorder and families and with other loved ones, and also people who are working in the field of dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, either in homes or in the workplace. I should also point out that at Fearless, we are not practitioners. We're not qualified to give people advice about what to do with their mental health issues. Our advice is always to go and seek help from a trusted GP and then go and find a practitioner in the field that can really help you through the building of a successful relationship. Having said that, as the chairman of Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Australia, New Zealand, I am alarmed at the growth in the number of people who are seeking help. But let me assure you, we're doing our best to advocate for better solutions and also promote the idea that being fearless about talking about your issues is also an important component of helping you through the maze. So, without any further ado, let me introduce Megan Dutton, who works at the Thompson Institute. Megan has had a very long career working in psychiatry and psychology and in mental health. She has a fountain of knowledge about what's been going on at the Thompson Institute since it opened, and working with its founder director, Professor Jim Logopoulos. We at Fearless have been watching what's been going on since 2018, and we've been stunned and amazed at what is going on at Australia's world-class Research and Treatment Institute. And we are delighted to be able to say today that early next year, a National Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Centre is going to open attached to the Thompson Institute. And it will be the first such facility in Australia. So without any further ado, welcome, Megan.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. And I'm very happy to be here.
Now, I should just point out, I'm going to ask a few questions of Megan in the next 30 minutes or so. And after that, we'll switch to a Q&A session, which I'll moderate. So I'm looking forward to hearing what your questions are. And I hope I can pull them together in a really exciting Q&A session. So Megan, my first question to you really is, looking over the last 5 years on the work of the Thompson Institute, I know the Institute has built itself a significant reputation in the community in the Sunshine Coast. I've been watching from afar the work it's been doing in what I call stellar research. Can you just give us a picture of what that's been like and how it is working in community? Because, we're so supportive of the idea that communities can help themselves if they had the right facilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. So for those of you who may not be aware, we are a specialist mental health and neuroscience institute, and we're working to address some of the most pressing mental health issues. So our unique model integrates world-leading research, clinical services, and education all under one roof. So that means rapid translation of the research into clinical practice. And all of this work is underpinned by neuroscience, which reveals new insights into mental health and how it's linked to our brain's structure and function. So we've got some key focus areas, and PTSD is a big one, as are suicide prevention, youth mental health, healthy brain aging, and chronic fatigue syndrome. And these areas are really well supported by research platforms that we have here at TI. And these include our imaging platform with MRI scans providing us with really invaluable data about the brain and how it changes across our treatments and our research. We've also got a molecular biology platform, which allows us to track biomarkers like BDNF and VEGF and other indicators of illness severity, as well as biomarkers that might be predictive of response. So these things allow us to conduct the clinical trials into novel therapeutics in a way that's really never been done before, and it has the potential to change the treatment landscape. But a big part of our approach is also community engagement and sectoral engagement. And this is huge because without community buy-in, we're just here in a silo doing what we do. So having that community buy-in is really integral to what we do. And the Alliance for Suicide Prevention, which we also host, has been really extraordinary in this regard. So it's a community-led approach to suicide prevention. And it's a very big issue here on the coast, where on average one person dies every week by suicide. I know in past data sets, we've been leading Australia in our rates of suicide. And that's part of why we're doing what we're doing here on the coast. So in 2020, that equated to 1,230 years of life lost and a potential $255 million in societal cost. So the Alliance is able to address this by empowering organisations and individuals, and it does that through training and engagement. So there's a growing membership of 150 organisations from community, private and public sectors, and they contribute to a suicide safer community through having these important conversations. And they also really assist in the circulation of resources. So without our organisations who are on board, it would be very difficult to do the work we do. The Alliance has also trained more than 3,400 people, and that has a ripple effect. So those leaders of organisations, mum and dad organisations, big public sector organisations, they take those learnings back, and that promotes conversations that can really quite literally save people's lives, as well as work to reduce stigma, because stigma, as we know, is still alive and well. So we've also developed, Chris, the Admiral program, and that's been funded to provide an online platform for people with emerging anxiety, loneliness, and depression. And it's an 8-week free program that is also funded by the government. We've also got the Mindset program, which is a youth mental health program. And these programs sit alongside our clinical research. So they allow us to provide support to people that come in here for the research. And they're a big part of our model of care as well. So back to the clinical research, which is my key interest area. Back in 2018, we started with the oral ketamine trial on suicidality. So novel therapeutics have come a long way. Back in the day, it was all about the serotonergic system, and our treatments were predominantly based on serotonin and dopamine. As we know, despite our best efforts, there were still significant levels of mental health concerns in the community, and people were not getting the outcomes that they really were looking for. So we moved towards a glutamatergic theory of mental illness, which is based around neural plasticity and the brain's capacity to adapt to stress and the environment and respond. So ketamine's one of the only glutamatergic agents that we have available, and it's being heavily investigated now for mental health purposes. So we did the world's first clinical trial on oral ketamine, and our PI, Dr. Adam Can, our consultant psychiatrist, had been working with it prior to coming on board at Thompson, and he'd seen some really outstanding results. So I was very excited to be a part of it. To not make the story too long for you, we brought in 32 adults, and the results were outstanding. We saw an initial responder rate of 69%, with a combined responder rate of up to 84% across the period of the trial. But not only that, the response could occur as quickly as 60 minutes post the first treatment. So ketamine was able to act very, very rapidly in some cases, as well as producing a very prolonged response in other cases as well. So it was something to behold. And for me as a clinician, after all my years, to see this type of response in people with very severe intractable illness was quite mind-blowing, to put it honestly. So the feedback we had from families from that early study was that we had effectively given them back their loved ones. And from the people in the study, it was that they couldn't explain it. Something had changed. They could feel it, but they couldn't say what it was. And that spurred us on. And part of that original cohort, there were people who had PTSD in that cohort. And what they reported, Chris, was a complete amelioration of their PTSD symptoms. And that, of course, sparked incredible interest. And here we are, a few years later, looking at PTSD. But another feature of that early study that I want to highlight is the safety and tolerability that we observed. So the ketamine had some short-term side effects that were largely resolved by the 60 minutes. And the majority of people who came through the study had no ongoing effects. And that's quite a contrast to our conventional drug treatments that we typically offer.
Now, I'm just thinking, of course, of this recent announcement by the TGA to allow MDMA research and trials to proceed. But it sounds to me like the Thompson Institute's been out there on the front foot with this oral ketamine program. And what I noticed when you said people report, we got our loved one back, I've heard so many people talk about their PTSD in terms of what changed. You know, when dad came home, he was changed. And so families have noticed this. And that is a terrific set of outcomes. And I just want to go to the Alliance on Suicide in the community and ask you, Megan, if I thought about other communities around Australia which are hurting as well, How would we go about providing that community leadership that Thompson's done over the last 5 years?
So that's a really good question, Chris. Look, the Alliance is based on the European Alliance Against Depression. So that model of community engagement is not new, but it's also about really creating a more supportive and inclusive community. So we've been able to lead that by highlighting really the impact of mental health on individuals and communities at a national, state and local level. So we've been able to really lead the charge there by reducing stigma and increasing awareness, and also promoting the understanding that mental health is everyone's concern. So another part of it has been sharing the impact of our research through the stories of the research outcomes. And that's something that we're very passionate about, because I think it's people's stories that are really why we're doing this. And of course, there's also the importance of the social and economic benefits that come with it. So collaboration has been a very big part of leading this sort of work on the Sunshine Coast. And we really understand that improving outcomes can't be achieved alone. And it does require the involvement of various stakeholders, including individuals with the lived experience, as well as health professionals and community organisations. So that type of leadership and collaboration has been modelled here on the Alliance Against Depression, and our Alliance for Suicide Prevention has been very, very successful in that regard. And it's a model that is highly scalable. It's very, very relevant to regional communities. And we've seen amazing support from our local community. And I went to a recent PTSD event and it was so well attended. There was a wait list, Chris. And the local organisations have really come on board in a big way in support. So I think once you get that buy-in, which is perhaps easier in a smaller community, a more regional community, that then facilitates the rest of the work, because we can't do the work we're doing without that community buy-in. And I think the Alliance has been the vehicle for the leadership in that regard that's allowed us to have the successes we've had.
And have you had any trouble you mentioned that you've trained 3,400, I guess they're counsellors for the community. And the buy-in from the stakeholders in the community. Has there been any trouble getting them on board, or is there really a thirst to get a handle on the problem and actually resolve it? Because the bottom line, as I see it, Megan, is, we're fundamentally talking about a productivity issue. That is, when people are well at work and well at home, they enjoy their lives. They're leading much better lives. And of course, it's got a very big impact on those who live with them, and particularly their kids.
Absolutely. No, look, we've had very little trouble. And I have to say, we've got an amazing comms and engagement team. So Mervat, Louise and Trish do an incredible job of rolling out the events for the Alliance, but they also get a lot of support from those community organisations who are heavily invested in the Alliance as well. So that's been a real feature, and one which I think has paved the way. And it's well supported, not just by clinicians or health professionals. It is the mums and dads, it's small business people, as well as the larger organisations. So we've been very well supported, and it's very much a two-way conversation where we're listening to what they say and what they tell us, and that shapes what we do and what we offer as well.
Okay, so coming back now to the oral ketamine research work that's been done, Are there plans to do further work once the National PTSD Centre has been open?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, since we did the Optos trial, we've completed an extension and maintenance trial, which ran for up to 9 months. That was really important for us because there were some concerns about side effects from the ketamine, and we were able to show through that work, even though at this stage it's still to be published, it will happen, but from our perspective, working in the area, we saw that people needed less treatment across time. We were able to push out treatments in some cases to a single monthly treatment, and people were able to maintain wellness. With the oral ketamine, it is handled differently by the body. So the pharmacokinetic profile of it means that it acts in a way that doesn't produce the same side effects as what you would see with the intravenous dosing. So we see the oral ketamine as a very exciting prospect into the future. We've completed a youth depression randomised controlled trial. We were lucky enough to be one of the sites for an NHMRC funded trial, and I firsthand, of course, was privy to some of the outcomes for young people in that. And into the future, Chris, with the new building, what's so exciting about that is we're going to be able to expand our research protocols. We'll be able to harmonise protocols across treatment modalities. So we'll be able to scan people's brains before they come in for treatment. We provide treatment, and with the new building, we'll have this space to be able to expand our offerings into the likes of EMDR and other therapies. And that will give us the capacity to see the brain changes that occur between responders and subgroups across the different treatments, which will help us to build a database of the brain during those types of therapies. And from baseline, we'll potentially be able to identify brain changes that are most likely to be able to respond to a particular treatment. So that's the dream, of course, of a true brain-based, personalised medicine approach.
Talking of challenges and opportunities, this sounds like a wow issue, and raises in my mind the sort of question about how would people become involved in participation in the trials, and what limits are there on taking people in? I mean, do you get a host of volunteers appearing, or do you have to go out and find them?
Yeah, look, surprisingly, we do have to go out and talk to the GPs, talk to the psychiatrists. We have information in social media and on our website, but given the amount of people on the coast living with PTSD, I have been surprised that perhaps there hasn't been greater uptake of these opportunities. They are incredible opportunities to access treatments. So people can self-refer. We have an expression of interest on the Thompson Institute website. And through that, we would then reach out to them. And we have a very friendly team of clinicians. We make it as easy as possible because we are aware that it can be very, very difficult to reach out, a very scary thing to do. And we take people through what it means to be in the trial. So, for example, the current trial for PTSD that we're recruiting to, Chris, runs across a 10-week period. And it does include MRI scans. We take blood because we're looking to see if we can pick up the biomarkers that might be indicative of treatment response or illness severity at baseline and at follow-up after they've had treatment. We also do rating scales where we ask people about other symptoms they may have. And one of the interesting things with PTSD is trauma, as we know, is really felt in the body. So quite a large number of people with PTSD, around 60%, may not have some of the classic symptoms, but rather they may have a host of physical health complaints because trauma can be expressed in that way in the body. So we're very cognizant of that and of the challenges in accessing treatment for PTSD. So we try and make it as an enjoyable experience as possible for people who come in. Of course, that is within the bounds of a research protocol. So research in Australia is very, very tightly regulated. We are working with an S8 scheduled drug, which means that we have even more regulations that we have to comply with, and safety is always paramount.
Look, what I like about this, Megan, is when our brand name of Fearless. I mean, I would invite anyone who's listening to this, just be fearless about putting your name forward. If you want to participate in this stuff, be fearless about this, because this is hope for the future. This is looking at how we can improve people's lives. And so if I was going off to talk to my trusted GP about this, what should I say about becoming involved in a trial at the Thompson Institute?
Yeah, for sure. So the GPs are largely very supportive. It's important for them to understand why we need them to be involved. And that's because we don't take over care of people clinically. We require the clinical care to continue as it is in the background while they are attending for this adjunctive treatment. So what that means is the person would continue with their typical team. They might have a psychologist, a GP, they may have a psychiatrist. They may be on other medications and they may be undergoing psychological therapies. All of that can continue. And we provide an adjunctive treatment, but we do a lot of safety monitoring. So we're monitoring the liver and the kidneys and the full blood profile. So ketamine is cleared through the liver. We have to make sure people stay nice and healthy. So we do blood tests across the trial and we send those results back to the treating medical practitioner, particularly if something shows up, like, for example, an elevated white cell count that we're not going to look into because it's not part of what we're looking at, but we would send that to the GP. So in talking to the GP, it's about letting them know that this is an opportunity, that our consultant psychiatrist will screen for eligibility. And that's another important safety feature, to make sure that we're not going to be doing harms to the person. And the GPs then can send their referrals through to the clinical research team here at Thompson. And we will reach out and take people through what it's like to be involved in the trial. Not everybody can have ketamine, Chris. It's probably important to note that. So people who have high blood pressure, uncontrolled high blood pressure, cardiovascular diseases, and other psychological conditions or psychiatric conditions like a psychotic illness or a bipolar disorder, for example, are not eligible. Also people who are pregnant or breastfeeding, because it's an experimental treatment and safety is really our priority.
Okay, now, do people have to pay to participate, or is this a freebie?
No, it is completely free. We provide a reimbursement for transport costs. So on treatment day, when people come in here, they're typically here for a 2-hour period and they can't drive home. It has to be treated as an intervention, the same as if you'd had a procedure. So people are required to get a ride home. We provide help with that. So we can provide local taxi vouchers, for example, and we also provide a reimbursement towards the cost of transport. So there is otherwise no cost to being involved in the research.
Okay. Well, I think that pretty much covers that topic. Thanks, Megan. And go back to what I said, let's be fearless about this, people. Here's a great opportunity to help others in the community through research and follow-on treatments. I'd like to turn the conversation around a little bit. From your experience, and I'm not just talking about your time at Thompson, but your previous experience as well. When we began in PTSD, Australia, New Zealand, and Fearless, we had a dream of building a large Taj Mahal, for example, alongside the Sydney Brain and Mind Centre, and we were going to do PTSD there. And we've sort of learned a lot over the last 5 years about the benefits of a community-based model. Can you elaborate a little bit on your perspective about the difference between those great big centres in the capital cities and what you're doing up there?
Yes. So our experience at the Thompson Institute and having the first mental health and neuroscience facility on the coast has been that it's been really important for the region itself. And I think that the testament to that is the community buy-in, and that buy-in has been very high. And we don't take that for granted at all. We take it very seriously because the community members in the region are very important to our institute's success. And the respect that we've been able to gain from the community also helps drive participation in our activities and in the research, and thus in our research outcomes as well. So ultimately, like, we hope this will change the way the government thinks about this type of facility. And I can't speak for the big city complexes, but I would imagine that they're vying for pieces of the pie in a very competitive research market, and that includes for participants. And as we might know, you know, there could be 20 people, 20 trials all trying to recruit, and people in the cities are often very, very busy, and potentially they may not get the buy-in that we have experienced. So I think that we've been able to lead the way from a regional point of view and servicing the regional area first, and then potentially collaborating with some of those other regions and also cities around Australia as we are able to further develop this framework. So, and I think we also have to consider, Chris, that the demographics can be different in a regional area, and that can indicate areas of need. So for example, here on the Sunshine Coast, we've got very high levels of veterans living here compared to other areas. And we've also got an aging population. A lot of people come here to retire. So we've been able to then provide the Healthy Brain Aging program. So ideal opportunity, as well as our focus on PTSD. So having a smaller facility with very strong community engagement and a team of academics combined with that community buy-in, I think has really paved the way for our success.
Yeah, and I've once had a conversation with Professor Logopoulos about a network of community Thompson Institutes and sharing out the research across the nation into different regions, but also picking up on your point about, you know, the people who are able to provide the time and effort for longitudinal research live in the regions. They don't live in the capital cities. And that's another benefit from a community-based model. And, you know, we have really changed now our advocacy, be saying, let's go for community-based regional models and just leave the great big city complexes to do what they do. And now I was listening to the radio this morning and picked up on a conversation about child maltreatment and child neglect. And I know from past, in our second national conversation, we heard about the work of Daniel Hermans and in this area. Can you elaborate a little bit about what happens with children, what the research is telling us, and what the consequences are for adult mental health issues?
Yeah, definitely. Look, it's a bit of a can of worms there. I could talk for a very long time on that topic, but keeping it as brief as I possibly can, what we know is the sequelae of childhood trauma is very, very severe, not just through the child and adolescent years. So, for example, neglect is associated with very, very high rates of adolescent suicidality. It also correlates to the emergence of borderline personality disorder, as does childhood sexual abuse. And all the forms of abuse are associated with poorer mental health outcomes. Towards adulthood, the longitudinal studies that have come out of the US have really shown that people who have adverse childhood events of a significant level are worse off across all domains. They have poorer physical health. They have more problems with addiction or employment, friendship networks, feeling connected in community. There's an absolute raft of sequelae. So it is a really important area, and one that I think is just gathering momentum now and interest now. One of the things that was interesting that has come out of the US as well after the 9/11 disaster was people who had a high level of attachment in childhood and that resilience from childhood were able to cope better with the challenges when a stressful event occurs. So people that have adverse childhood events have a bit of a harder time in actually recovering and could potentially be more likely to go on and develop disorders like PTSD. So, in the future, I think being able to intervene early is going to be key to preventing progression. And you mentioned Dan Herman's and some of the work he's doing here with the longitudinal adolescent brain study, which is a huge project, producing a lot of data, scanning young people's brains across a 5-year period from 12 to 17. And that's towards being able to identify biomarkers that may be predictive of the emergence of mental health issues, and that may facilitate earlier treatment and intervention so that we can actually prevent progression in that regard. And for those who are interested, there's a very interesting paper that's come out very recently on the connectome or the brain fingerprint. And there is I think we could probably get a link to it shared, or it's on the Thompson Institute website as well. So really interesting stuff when we consider that 75% of mental health issues do emerge across adolescence and into early adulthood. So that makes the notion of healthy families a very, very important conversation to be having.
Yeah, I think we've all got to do a lot more work on the concept of healthy families and what they really look like, because I think people have been shy about talking of it. And again, I think we need to be fearless about it. So I can't help myself thinking that. Look, you've had a career in doing clinical work and research. And if I looked at the possibility of building more community Thompson Institutes, and I look at the waiting queues for mental health treatments, I got to ask myself, where are we going to find the researchers, the people that are doing all this work? So what advice would you give to anyone looking at this webinar who might be thinking this is a way to go and spend the rest of my life?
I would be saying do it. It's an incredibly exciting area to be a part of, and I think the advances that have been made in the last 5 to 10 years are incredible. The technology that we have now is a real game changer. In the past, it was all about animal models of research. Now with MRI and imaging platforms and very sophisticated molecular biology platforms, we're able to study the human brain in ways we've never been able to do before. One of the things as a clinician coming into that is being able to correlate the research with my clinical background. And I think being able to partner clinical researchers, with academics, has been part of the success, and it's part of what's needed to really progress change in the mental health sector. So for clinicians who are interested in getting involved in research, it is sometimes about getting back to uni and doing those higher degrees by research. I'm about to complete my PhD looking at the underlying stress mechanisms in the brain that lead to the emergence of mental disorders. And I think that through that sort of path, we will be able to really change the field in the future. And that's what I think so exciting about being involved in the research at the Thompson Institute at the moment. And of course, we've got this whopping big building being built out the back as we speak, and that's going to give us increased capacity. So combining the literacy around mental health in the community with this sort of research, I think it'll be a convergence of those two vehicles for change that will really see improved treatment outcomes into the future.
And so for those who don't know, I have actually seen, again, the concrete pad for the building out the back, as you said, Megan. It's going to double the size of the institute. So this is scaled up place, and its focus on post-traumatic stress disorder, of course, is absolutely so exciting about the future. Can you with all of your work, can you conceive of a day when PTSD we will not actually have to care about much because we've solved the problem of treatment? or is it going to go on being resistant to one-stop shops?
Yeah, look, I think that is it's a very good question, Chris. From my perspective, and considering my past experience plus my experiences in the research here, I think the brain-based approach is really the way to go. Things we've done in the past haven't been as helpful for a lot of people. A lot of people with trauma don't want to and can't talk about the trauma because those regions of the brain go offline in trauma. So for us, having a brain-based approach where we can look at the brain, see where the changes are, identify it early, and then potentially suggest treatments that, based on the evidence, are very likely to help that individual. That would be a dream in the future, but there's a lot of work to be done around mental health literacy. So having buy-in, as we talked about earlier, for this type of treatment would involve upskilling and perhaps educating the population more about the effects of stress on their brain and about the long-term sequelae of persistent stress, which leads to the emergence of mental disorders. So it would be a convergence of a number of fields coming together. And we are very lucky here because we've got the education. We've also got a program in mental health and neuroscience designed to bring on that next generation, plus the community engagement so that people are talking about mental health combined with the evidence from the research. So it's early days, but into the future, I definitely can see a time where, for example, if a worksite accident occurs, the person will be fast-tracked for a scan that we can say, okay, we've noticed this in the brain, and that means that this person's more likely to respond to X treatment at this point in their journey. And by doing that, we can prevent progression to disorders like PTSD. So the neuroscience is at the heart of everything we do, and we'll be continuing to look deeply into that.
So this is, I mean, if I thought about my own experience, if I thought I had a broken leg, I'd go and get an X-ray.
Yeah.
And we'd know what to do about it. What you're saying is we can use the technology to look inside your brain, and we can try and determine what's gone wrong.
Yeah.
And by knowing what's gone wrong, we can suggest appropriate forms of treatment from a strategic perspective. That is breathtaking change in the ability to solve a lot of these issues. What about people who are born as, born with a mental health condition? I mean, we've always said that post-traumatic stress disorder comes from a lived experience, so the trauma is coming from living and all of that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But some people's mental conditions aren't from a lived experience, they're inherited. Can PTSD be inherited? I mean, these are pretty serious questions, aren't they?
They really are. And there is a lot of evidence now that epigenetic changes do occur and that these changes are inheritable. So that what that means is a parent with lived experience can have a downregulation of receptors or expression of certain proteins, for example, like the neurotrophins. And when they have children, the kids can inherit this. However, it's important to realise as well that a lot of these changes respond to interventions and the pathways are activity dependent. So, for example, exercise, mindfulness, active relaxation, and meaningful contribution, being a part of a community, all are healthy for the brain. They protect the brain. So even though people can, as you said, be born with a propensity towards depression or anxiety, it doesn't mean that they will actually develop it. There may be a genetic risk there, but with the appropriate interventions, they can certainly avoid developing the actual condition. And if they do, there are very good treatments and evidence now. So for example, in our research with ketamine, we're looking at the biomarkers. FKBP5 was in the news recently as a biomarker, and it's one we're interested in because it's associated with stress resilience. Ketamine is able to alter the transcription of that in the brain and potentially downregulate so that we have a normalization of the stress response. So that's something else that we're very excited about as a part of our research at the moment as well.
Okay, look, we've got about just over 10 minutes to run. So anybody who's got a burning question out there, please put it up on the Q&A sector. I have done my best to put as many of those questions into the dialogue as we've got. So coming back to the new technology, coming back to the ability to get this brain scan done real quick in a workplace accident, I mean, are these machines available all around the nation, or is this still a pretty rare commodity?
Look, it's developing the expertise and the databases required to be able to use the database as evidence for the treatment response that's required. So it's building that evidence base that is the first step. And we're starting to do that. So it is a dream to get to the point where somebody in Cairns could be scanned. And for example, they could send the scan to us here at TI. We can look at it and say, okay, this is what we're seeing and this is the most appropriate treatment. So to give an example, in functional MRI, we can look at network connectivity, and we know that in depression, there's elevated default mode network connectivity that equates to ruminations and negative cognitions going around in the head. So we know that transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is another treatment modality that we're exploring here, can downregulate the default mode network activity. So normalizing that can give people great relief from those ruminations and negative cognitions. So that's an example of a very targeted treatment approach. So there's a number of scans that can be done, and functional MRI gives us information about how the brain is communicating, how the parts of the brain are talking to each other. And we've published a couple of papers based on the Optos trial that show that ketamine also shows very good capacity to modulate those neural circuits. So between the ketamine and the TMS, and then potentially expanding into those other areas with the new building, it is very exciting. But you're right, you know, the expertise is required, but it doesn't have to be available at every single site, because as long as we've got enough people doing the work, there's potential that the scans can be done and sent here for interpretation or to another site, you know, when the day comes that there are other facilities similar to Thompson Institute.
Yeah, right. Now, I noticed that on the webinar chat, the link that you referred to has been put up by our oversighter. And now I just want to come back to this community-based suicide prevention model. I've been told that up in the Sunshine Coast, there's an app people can have on their phone, and that the outcome of pressing the help button on the app is I can go and talk immediately within meters to someone who's been trained as a counsellor. Is that true?
Yeah, so we, as part of the Alliance, we have rolled out the iHelp app, and it is something that could be done in every community. So the aim of that is to link people. It collects a very small amount of data about the person, just enough to be able to link them to appropriate services. And for communities, it's ideal because often new people come and go. GPs tend to stick with the same person who might have a long wait list, but this app lets the individual jump on and say, okay, I have X and Y going on in my life at the moment, and the app will come up with people in this area who work in that area who can potentially then provide that support that they need. So it is a terrific idea, and it's one that I think has been well subscribed to here on the Sunshine Coast. Right.
And I mean, is that, you know, every time I look at the television at night, I'm told to ring the Lifeline or Beyond Blue or somebody else if I've got an issue I want to talk about. I mean, this app is different in the sense that it's not in a call center on the other side of the nation, that I'm getting a face-to-face conversation up real quick. Are these the positive measures that you see are making a difference on the coast?
Absolutely, because it's also demonstrating the community helping the community. So it's that community buy-in that we talked about earlier, that we're seeing the upskilling of community members towards a greater literacy. Excuse me, my voice I think is about to give out. I'll just take a quick drink. Yes, so, and what that means is practitioners in the regional areas are linked to people in the regional areas looking for services. But in the case of a critical incident, it also will link people to 24/7 support. And that's something that's very important because, as we know, stressful events don't just happen in business hours.
No, and I remember going to a meeting of Suicide Watch a couple of years ago and being told of people who were seeking help, and you know, they put up their head, I need some help, and they're told to come back in 6 weeks, and of course that's totally unsatisfactory. All right, now I just want to finish up. So early next year we're going to open the National PTSD Centre. It's going to be a very exciting opportunity. What will be the priorities in the early days of that new centre for research and treatment?
Yes, so we'll be continuing with what we're doing currently, which is working with the oral ketamine. We'll also be looking at other treatment modalities like the EMDR. We've put in a number of very, very nicely decorated therapy rooms. And that's, I guess, acknowledging that the way of the future is longer sessions. And if we go down the route of other psychedelics, it also gives the possibility of having that, excuse me, having that capacity to be able to do those longer sessions in a very comfortable environment. It will also have a full working lab, so we'll be running a lot of an increase in the molecular biology, which will allow us to look at, for example, neurotrophic factors. So we've just had some early reports from the molecular biology team that the PTSD studies have shown a spike in brain-derived neurotrophic factor post-ketamine treatment. And that's super significant because the neurotrophins are really implicated in a lot of these conditions. People who die by suicide are very depleted in brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and it's an integral part of the neural plasticity mechanism for ketamine. So seeing people's brains having this spike in the BDNF was very, very exciting for our team to hear. So that platform will be expanded with a large lab that will potentially be able to look more deeply into these mechanisms. And of course, the idea of that is we'll be able to identify potential future targets for treatment. So it's all part of the end game to be able to really further understand the neurobiological underpinnings so that we can come up with better, more appropriate and very personalised treatments for people. So all of those things will be moving across there in the first instance. So the oral ketamine research will be continuing in the new building with more space, more observation rooms. So that's a very exciting thing for us.
Well, that sounds really exciting. I'm really looking forward to what happens in 2024 when this comes to fruition and we can see what's going on. I want to thank you, Megan, for a really interesting hour of conversation. We've had some questions and answers, and we've got a couple of questions here that require a more detailed and specific set of answers. So I don't think they're for this webinar, but I mean, it's been fascinating to hear the story of what's going on with the brain. And I remember a conversation a few years ago with someone working in neurobiology and talking about, there are more neurons in your brain than there are stars in the galaxy, and all these kinds of pictures for the future. And to come back to the theme for today, we're talking about challenges and opportunities. I think you've laid out a lot of challenges for the future, but wow, the opportunities for making life a lot better for a whole range of people who are living with post-traumatic stress disorder in their lives. And I mean the people who are the sufferers, and I also mean the families who live with them, the partners and the children, and the people in the workplaces who have to put up with people who are not quite 100% at work every day. That future is starting to look really hopeful now with the kind of research you've been doing at the TI. So on behalf of all of us at Fearless and Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Australia and New Zealand, and I thank you for today, and would you pass on our best good fortune to everyone working at the Thompson Institute.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.